Our politics has all become sort of 24/7. There's this news cycle where no one can pay attention for more than a day. Not even the media can pay attention for more than a day. They've got to move on to something else, you know. There is no narrative here which is trying to weave together a kind of a story which kind of tells us where we are in history almost. It really is like the Facebook, Twitter, everyone's got the concentration span of a goldfish kind of thing. I mean, the sort of analogy I would like to give is I used to be able to send an email that had two sentences separated by a space. And what that did was that implied that there may have been two questions in there or two things that needed to have attention paid to them. And that used to be pretty normal. These days I've discovered that if I send one of those emails, I only get an answer to the first sentence. I never get an answer to the second one. So I now have to send two emails. The reason why I say this is I'm trying to paint a picture that I think that's what's kind of like happened to the way people think. People do not seem to think beyond their noses anymore. It is really unbelievable. Now I'll do this big arching kind of narrative and we'll come back to my point. I read recently that Boeing are in big trouble because the software on their planes is essentially dodgy. And they decided that for fuel conservation reasons, they could rejig their plane a little bit so they could have slightly different engines. And the engines, because they were slightly different, needed to be seated slightly different on the wing, like slightly more forward on the wing compared to what they used to be seated. But Boeing come up with this theory that what they can do is they can compensate for all that with software. So they can sort of do it on the cheap. So that basically when the plane is trying to go down a bit because the engines are a bit forward, the software can maneuver the flaps and everything so the plane kind of goes up a bit instead of going down a bit. Sounds like a reasonable kind of plan, okay. But then Boeing go the extra step. We've got these engineers who can design the software and it's very good. But hey, these suckers, these guys cost like $100 an hour, these guys that develop the good software. We've come up with a plan where we're going to outsource our software development, which is what they've done. So they outsource their software development to engineers that cost $9 an hour, to guys who are going to do exactly what they're told. You ask a software guy to do X, he does X. Back in the old days, you asked your in-house guy to do X. He might look at it and ask you a question and say, hang on, if you do that, that's going to cause that. In other words, everything now has been outsourced. Everything's down to the bottom dollar. It's all down to the dollar. And Boeing now have got a situation where there's dodgy software and they've had 2 of their planes crash, which has now caused a catastrophe for Boeing. Now there you've got a really good example of really short-term thinking, everything down to the bottom line, everything based on the dollar, everything corporatized, financialized, and the outcome is better for whom exactly? Better for who? Better for only the guy at the top of Boeing whose share price went up temporarily because they made more profits for 3 quarters, he could cash out his options and he could walk off into the sunset with $700 or $800 million worth of profits. And to hell with the fact that the company is now saddled with this huge bloody problem. And, oh, by the way, 300 people got killed. Now you can see this kind of mentality is creeping in everywhere. Everywhere. In America, Trump comes along and he brings in tax cuts. Why do they bring in tax cuts? Okay, because we've got all these companies that have outsourced all their operations overseas and they've got all their money overseas, and we think it'd be a really good idea if we could encourage them to bring their money back to America so that we can invest in America. Okay, makes sort of sense, doesn't it? Encourage them to bring it all back. So these huge tax cuts come in and the money starts flooding back into America. But where does it go? Does it go into new factories? Does it go into higher wages for Americans? No. Where does it all go? It goes into stock buybacks. Why does it go into stock buybacks? What's a stock buyback? It goes into stock buybacks because the companies take all of this money and they borrow a whole lot more money and they buy their shares back on the open market. And when they buy their shares back on the open market, what that does is it makes the share price go up. Not only that, after they've bought their shares back, they cancel the shares that they've bought back, which means the company's got less shares, which means the per share is higher. So everything is designed to make the share prices go up. So the share price goes up. Who benefits from the share price going up? Oh, that's right. The guys at the top of the company whose options and their huge performance packages and everything depend on hitting performance targets, and a performance target means share price at that level. So everything is designed to keep the share price up. Never mind the fact that none of the money coming back into America is going back into the companies in the form of new equipment, new plant, smarter ways of making planes not bloody nosedive, that kind of stuff. None of it. It's going into share buybacks. Short term, CEO walks off with a massive package, huge amount of debt on the balance sheet, problem left for later on. Everything is about problem left for later on. Here in Australia, 1.5% is the official interest rate. 1.5%. Now I'm talking in the past, yeah? 1.5% is the official interest rate. Record lows. Emergency lows 10 years ago. So now they're dropping interest rates down to 1.25%. An emergency measure. Hang on a second. Weren't we already at emergency measures? No, hang on a second. We've been dropping interest rates for 10 years, okay? It hasn't done the trick. So what are we going to do? We're going to drop them some more. Oh, I get that. I see. So out there you are doing your thing for 10, 20, 30 years and it's not working. So what's the solution? More of it? It's like you've got a patient and you're giving them a drug and the drug's not fucking working. So the solution is to give them some more of that. That's what's going on. That's going on everywhere. Everything is stagnating. Everything is just trying to keep this bloody thing going, whatever it is we've got going. Apparently everything's booming. The stock market, record highs. The bond market, record highs. Every asset, record highs. Oh, what else is record highs? Debt, record highs. Depression, record highs. There are all sorts of things that are actually not on the balance sheet. There are things that are on the balance sheet. The things that are not on the balance sheet, all the shit things. So when the companies report, they only report the good stuff. The news is just good. It's absolutely excellent. Where's the strategy? Where's the plan? Where is any problem being solved? We've got increasing gap between rich and poor. We've got climate change issues, biodiversity, the planet. We've got this money system where money's just being printed all over the place and prices are going through the roof. We've got a demographic bubble going on where there are going to be more and more people retiring and less people working. And basically the solution to the problem is just more and more of the same and more debt, and just keep the thing going and keep the happy face on all the time. It's the same everywhere. In Australia, apparently it's really good news that interest rates went down 0.25%. 0.25%. So that people can spend, by borrowing, by the way, not by actually earning, but by borrowing, an extra $500,000 to go and buy some lump of bricks down the road that they call a house. And then what's the plan? In 5 years' time, where now everyone's got $1.5 million worth of debt instead of $1 million, now interest rates have to go down again. Why do they have to go down again? Because there's an emergency going on, there's too much debt. So they go down again. So everyone borrows more. Because the plan is just to try as hard as they bloody can just to keep this sucker going before it blows up. It's like hot potato. Just don't have that potato in your hand when the bloody music stops. Seems to be the name of the game, right? The number of times I've heard people saying that humans are very, very, very imaginative, and they're entrepreneurial, and what we're going to do is we're going to find a solution to whatever problem faces us. We're going to find it within us to whatever problem faces us. What I see is we have managed to build a system, an economic and financial system and political system, which has become expert at the exact opposite. We have managed a system which can pretend that everything is fantastic when anyone who opens their eyes knows it's not. All these naysayers out there, all these doomsdayers, they've been telling us that the market's going to collapse for 20 years. They've been telling us it's going to collapse for 20 years. We don't have a market. Had we a market, it would have collapsed 10 or 15 years ago. We don't have one anymore. We have a state-controlled, manipulated thing like the Truman Show that we're all getting told is reality, and it's not. Fake, everything. Everything's fake. So what do you believe? Open your eyes, have a look around, ask yourself the question. If wages are going down and the price of everything is going up, how's that going to work? It's not. I reckon, which is what I'm going to do, because I've had enough of all this. The best thing for me is when I get people talking to me about this kind of stuff, I say, look, break out the popcorn, sit back and enjoy the show, because there's going to be one hell of a show coming. Something's coming. I don't know who's coming after Trump. I don't know who's coming after Morrison. All I know is at some point the penny's going to drop, and at some point the bill's going to come due, and it's coming no matter what kind of fake signals we have for ourselves. And I think anyone with half a brain knows that it ain't right out there at the moment.